He wasn't expected to find it vacant as he walked into the dusty attic of his old house. The furnishings and personal items had all been taken throughout the years by a succession of new residents. The mansion was constructed by his father in the 1920s. If only Rudy knew where to look, he had concealed something inside. He knew he had discovered it when he noticed a piece of thread dangling from the ceiling. Rudy Schlattner had to leave Czechoslovakia with his family when he was just a small lad. All citizens of German heritage were instructed to relocate to Germany after World War II ended in 1945. The government confiscated Rudy's family house, making it its property. But Rudy hadn't forgotten what his father had taught him all those years before, even now, 70 years later. Rudy, who is currently in his 80s, has his own family. He established roots in Germany after his parents established a new life for themselves there. It wasn't simple, though. For the sake of his family's protection, Rudy's father fled behind his career, friends, house, and indeed, his entire existence. But he had also left some other things behind. That ancient mansion, which he had so painstakingly constructed using his own two hands, had a family secret concealed within its walls. Rudy was now turning around. Finally, Rudy had enough money to travel back to his nation of origin. He had put a lot of effort into building up a tiny nest egg for himself in addition to making sure he had enough money to provide for his children. But for all these years, he had been constrained by more than just money. He had been evading the traumatic memories that inhabited that home. But he was aware that the clock was ticking. Rudy was aware that despite how quickly time had passed, he still had a few excellent years ahead of him. He decided to go back to the Czech Republic after talking it over with his kids. It was most likely going to be his final journey. Now was the only option, but his family wasn't going to let him travel by himself. Rudy was in awe with his homeland when the Schlattner family arrived at their destination. All of the memories resurfaced at once. There was the schoolhouse he had gone to, as well as the public library, where he had spent a lot of time as a youngster. As if he had never left, all the things that were taken from him were still there. As they cautiously approached his old residence, which is why he had come, it seemed unreal. The mansion, which was perfectly situated on the expansive green lawn, was just as he remembered it. Even the sculpted pattern his father had sculpted into the wall was still there, along with the stone front stairs, awnings, and other features. Even though it was reality, he had the impression that he was having an odd dream. He had to get the caretaker's approval before entering the home because it had been turned into a senior care center. Rudy went straight for the attic, walking there seemingly of his own. He hoped the hidden cache of his father was still there. He'd learned through talking to the caretaker that the old mansion had undergone several restorations over the years. Had it been discovered previously? He was late, was he? He ascended the stairs to his boyhood home's dusty attic, while his family followed him. When he noticed that all of the furnishings that had been there when they had left had been taken out and was now lost forever, he had a sense of grief. He took a time to process it all before moving on with his quest. His pulse skipped a beat as he started tapping on the wooden panels that slanted downward to form the A-frame ceiling. Rudy was completely aware of what he was seeking. He only hoped that the renovations to the house hadn't completely destroyed the ceiling. He was aware that the likelihood of discovering his father's covered location was remote. But then he thought back to his father's final words. His search was for any indications of a weak board. Then he noticed it. There was a short piece of string hanging from one of the pieces of wood. If he hadn't known to look for it, he would have missed it. He grasped the end of the string and pulled. The wooden board came tumbling down, revealing a secret compartment that had been hidden in the eaves of the house. When Rudy peered inside, he couldn't hold back his tears. The secret compartment was packed neatly with boxes and meticulously wrapped packages. He couldn't believe it. He'd found his father's treasure. With his family's help, they began to move the items out of the compartment. But Rudy knew that there were some logistics to deal with before he began unpacking. With trembling fingers, he called the authorities. Representatives from a museum in the nearby town of Ústí nad Labem arrived and began the massive task of unpacking, categorizing, and dating the artifacts. What Rudy had found was astonishing, a treasure trove of World War II memorabilia. Although some items appeared to be of little value, others were worth a fortune. What did they find? "We were surprised that so many ordinary things were hidden there," said museum employee Thomas Okura. "Thanks to the circumstances, these objects have a very high historical value." There were everyday items that offered a rare glimpse into the 1940s, such as old sewing boxes. Others were priceless. Rudy inspected each item in his hands, and knew he would cherish this moment forever. Each item held its own story. There were old toys that Rudy and his siblings had played with, a bittersweet reminder of his childhood before they had to abandon their lives and home. There was an umbrella, paperweights, badges, hats, and books. The manager of the museum was dumbfounded by the rare and historical find. Among the items were some small and mysterious metal objects. The museum representatives speculated that the tiny pieces of metal probably belonged to some kind of old piece of machinery that Rudy's father owned, but they were manufactured in Czechoslovakia, at a factory that no longer existed. Next, they found an old scale and were taken aback by its condition. All its parts were still working, and there was hardly any rust. They couldn't believe it. Then, there were the paintings. Rudy had loved his parents' paintings when he was a boy. Of all the items in the secret stash that his father had left behind, he wanted to keep these the most. But there was one problem. All these items technically belonged to the Czech government. That meant that he couldn't keep any of it. Although Rudy had to come to grips with the fact that by law, he had been required to report his find to the authorities, he still walked away a happy man. Even though he couldn't keep any of his father's treasures, he was happy to have seen all the items that he had known when he was a boy. He's just happy to have some closure. These rare time capsules are destined to reside in a local museum, where others will be able to view these fascinating relics and learn about what life was like in the 1940s. Rudy's father had even packed puzzles, socks, and baby clothes, creating a complete picture of everyday family life. But what makes Rudy's find so valuable to historians? Museum manager Vaclav Hofek said, "Such a complete finding of objects hidden by German citizens after the war is very rare in this region." It seemed as if Rudy's father had anticipated his family's return to their home much sooner than anyone had anticipated. But Rudy is not bitter about his family's treasures being seized by the museum. In fact, he has promised to help identify each item himself. In total, Rudy had found 70 packages of priceless artifacts and provided rare glimpses into the everyday life of the Czech citizens before World War II had started. When the war broke out, it caused enormous animosity from the Czech population toward the ethnic German population and the government. 1.6 million ethnic Germans were forcibly expelled from their homes into the American Zone, West Germany. Thousands of people perished during this time. The lucky ones were the ones who were expelled into the American Zone. Another 800,000 were sent to the Soviet Zone. Rudy and his family were fortunate enough to be sent to the American Zone, and his father had time to hide he and his family's possessions. Imagine being Rudy's family members during that time in history, going about your daily life as best you can, and then suddenly having your entire life uprooted and being forced to leave because of your nationality. Well, that's exactly what happened. Rudy's family had to leave everything. After going through all that, was it really fair that the government claimed the treasure? The museum posted dozens of pictures of all Rudy's family treasures on their Facebook page, with a long caption explaining the circumstances of the objects. It says, "The unique discovery of the catch from 1945 took place on Tuesday, July 28 in Liboček and Ústec. Local resident Rudy Schlattner informed the municipal office that the objects his family had left behind after the end of the war were hidden under the roof of the kindergarten building." With the participation of the mayor of Libuš, the headmistress of the kindergarten, an archaeologist from the Archaeological Institute of the Academy of Sciences, and 2 employees of the Museum of the City of Ústí nad Labem, the objects were picked up and taken to the Ústí Museum. The caption continues. But netizens from all around the world were not impressed with the story. Instead of marveling at the rare items, they took issue with the way the entire situation was dealt with and began to give the museum a piece of their mind. Some English-speaking Facebook users thought that it was entirely unfair for the state to claim Rudy's family's priceless antiques for their own after they had been through such hardships. One annoyed Facebook user wrote, "The Czech state expelled his family and stole his house. Couldn't they at least give him these souvenirs after 70 years? Their further fate will be discussed in the coming days. The house in which the kindergarten is located today was built in 1928 to 1929 as a family villa by Rudy Schlattner's father, who was a wealthy businessman." The museum's Facebook post continues, translated from Czech. After the end of World War II, when the deportation of the German population began, the Schlattner family hid a large number of objects in a hiding place under the roof of the house. 13-year-old Rudy was also present during the hiding. It's a shame the state can claim the property that clearly belonged to Rudy Schlattner. Governments are the cause of so many people's abuse. One angry Facebook user wrote in English. Another user wrote, "It's nice, but I will let the gentleman choose what he wants, and he will decide for himself a hat to do with the objects. I think they are the most valuable to him," in Czech. Does this really seem normal to anyone? Stealing is theft, even if the state sanctifies it 100 times. And other user commented. And another, "I would give nothing to the state. What will the state give me? I'm finding this horrible. They are things and memories of his loved ones and should belong to that gentleman. Let him decide what to keep." Not confiscation. As if the expulsion of Czechs from the border and then the forced removal of the Germans wasn't terrible enough. "I think enough wrong has been done," another person chimed in. But no matter how much Rudy protested, he had no choice but to give the artifacts up to the state. Now their home is in the museum, where other people can see them and understand what everyday life was like at that time. The value of the find is incalculable, mainly for Mr. Schlattner, and for us and other generations of knowledge, personal story, and irreplaceable memories, one user observed. In order to protect the privacy of those depicted, some names, locations, and identifying characteristics have been changed and are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblances to actual events or places or persons, living or dead, are entirely coincidental.